something!
Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Colin Stetson album, New History Warfare, Volume 3. Colin Stetson is a Canadian saxophone player, and he has been quite the buzz over the past few years in jazz and experimental music circles, but he has sort of an indie music appeal as well. Of course, his last full-length album was also recorded at the infamous Hotel to Tango, which has been home to many a great Canadian artists such as Silver Mount Zion Orchestra and Godspeed You Black Emperor. On top of that, Colin has actually toured a little bit with Godspeed too. And while all of these connections have brought Colin a lot of visibility, nothing is quite as attention-grabbing as this man's performances, his live performances, and just his musical style in general. When it comes to playing the saxophone, really no matter what the size, this man is a machine. And the man's albums in this New History Warfare music series basically consists of these one-take saxophone pieces that flutter and howl endlessly thanks to Colin's continuous breathing techniques, making it so that he never really needs to stop playing. Not only are Colin's technical abilities really impressive, but to take it even further, his music has been recorded in some really interesting ways too, with some very strange mic placements that not only pick up his breathing, the saxophone as well, the notes that it's making, and the sounds of the valves on the saxophones opening and closing, creating kind of a rhythmic background for the melodic side of these pieces that Colin is writing. These have basically been the main characteristics of this New History Warfare series, and from what I understand, this is going to be the last installment of it. And I wouldn't say that Colin is ducking out prematurely or anything like that. He does create music on this album that does have a sense of finality here. There are a lot of tracks on this album that to me feel like very sentimental, feel like a hug goodbye. Colin takes a lot of the very obtuse and polarizing saxophone experiments that he indulged in on his previous two albums and tries to interpret and express them in a way that feels beautiful. Colin creates moments on this album that feel like a new day, some kind of ascension, like I'm listening to an emotional wake-up call, just some reminder that my heart is beating and that my lungs are pushing out air. It's time to just stop walking through life as a stone-faced drone and just feel something. There's just something about the way that Stetson blends very simple with very complicated ideas in his solo sax pieces, from his endlessly evolving saxophone arpeggios and runs up and down a spectrum of pitches, and how he has these howls coming out from his throat in the background, sort of like this very eerie crying voice in the distance that is muffled by the saxery jammed in his mouth. And also on this album, singer-songwriter Justin Vernon, aka Bon Iver, comes along and contributes vocals on a number of tracks here, helping to enhance that sentimental vibe that Colin was going for on a lot of these tracks. However, there are moments where I feel like Justin's version of sentimental and Colin's version of sentimental might not necessarily, I guess, mesh. Like the opening track on this LP, And in Truth, where Justin is singing in his trademark falsetto, multi-tracked, soaring over Colin's fluttering saxophone lines, and to me, it just kind of feels like Justin's voice is overtaking what Colin's doing as opposed to sort of complementing it. But Justin doesn't always sort of stay in his comfort zone on this album. There is the song Brute, where Colin is playing especially fast on the track, just clacking his valves. He is breathing as hard as hell, making his sax just blare out furiously, and toward the back end of the song, Justin Vernon actually comes through and contributes what sounds like death metal style growls on the song. This album feels like a metal nightmare. The only other track that featured Justin's voice that really sort of impressed me was the cover of What Are They Doing in Heaven Today? Originally a Washington Phillips song, a gospel tune, where we hear Justin singing in sort of a normal range of voice, which is actually very soulful, very emotive. It actually complements the track really well, and it makes me feel as if, well, maybe a normally sung voice would have sufficed, not just a falsetto on some of the other tracks as well. Of course, there is also the 15-minute monolith of a title track that is on this album that I am pretty in love with. The beginning of this track has a lot of fluttering sax lines too, but the way that they're played and the phrasing that they're running up and down, it feels very pretty in a way. But the back end of the song, as the track evolves, it gets really heavy, really intense. The track feels like I'm listening to just mammoth calls, like extinct tundra mammoths that are 50 feet tall and made of gears and pulleys. They're like mecha mammoths, and they're just leaving giant freaking footprints in snow dunes and sheets of ice. There are a lot of highlights on this LP, for sure. No question, no doubt. But for me personally, the downsides that this LP offers, some of the ideas are samey across the album, especially if you were a huge fan of Colin's previous 2 LPs as well. Though, yes, there is a little bit more tenderness musically on this album. It doesn't really feel like Colin is pushing his technical ability that far on this album, at least to my ears. Which, if you're head over heels for Colin, might not necessarily be a deal breaker, but for me personally, I wasn't really in love with every single vocal contribution that Bon Iver brought to the table. I was much more enamored with what Shara Warden and Laurie Anderson did on his last full-length LP. I'm pretty much feeling a light to decent 7 on this LP. If you've given it a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's about it. Anthony Fantano, Colin Stetson, forever.